to conferences all the time is the main driver for progress in your skill set and also your relationship, and basically any professional can become a better professional by attending conferences.
It's not the standard, okay? It's a movie theater, but the visual is great and the sound is great, and I've seen a lot of room and space, and I think it's organized well.
Seeing all the people here today and they're excited about stuff, and you can see the energy and the desire to learn and do new things.
And I was positively surprised about the depth, the technical depth of the sessions, and how that makes the tester part of the team.
I think developers do benefit from coming to QA conferences, just the same as testers can benefit from going to dev conferences. You know, you've got to have a broad understanding of what's going on.
It's really inclusive. I would say like it's super diverse, people are really open and friendly, and it's really organized.
Conferences are well worthwhile just for the ideas that they spark in people. When people come back to the office, they're full of ideas and they're all energized up.
My name is Decoutere. I'm working for CDG as a test trainer, teaching freshly started testers how to become better testers using my 14 years of experience within the domain of testing. I live in Belgium with my wife and 2 beautiful children. My speech topic is about test myths. Every tester will encounter badly written manual test cases in their career. Tests that just don't feel that comfortable reading them. I will discuss patterns that exist for these bad test cases, and I will elaborate on what you can do to improve your test cases.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name's Wim. I come from CDG in Belgium, and I'm here to tell you a little bit more on things that I've discovered over my years of experience as a tester. First of all, I would like to discuss what I'm not going to talk about. As testers, we know we have to talk about scope, but we also have to talk about our non-scope. I'm not going to talk about test automation. It's really about manual executable test cases. I'm not going to discuss any test design techniques. As you can see on the slide here, there exist a lot of test design techniques, and even this list isn't complete. But I'm not going to discuss any of those. I'm not going to discuss test management. I'm not going to tell you what to do with the test cases. It's really about writing test cases. So I'm also not going to discuss any test tools that you might use to write your test cases in. If you do it on a piece of paper, you do it in Excel, or you do it in Micro Focus ALM, I don't care. Last thing I'm not going to discuss are definitions. Most of you have heard of the ISTQB glossary, or I hope that you've heard of it. Well, I'm not going to use any of those definitions, except for one. The definition of a test case. What is a test case for me? Well, first of all, a test case is based upon requirements. You used some kind of test design technique to derive your test case from requirements. Your test case has an input, your starting situation. It has preconditions, other test cases you may have executed before you can execute your test case. You do some actions with those inputs, and then you have an expected result. You are on a new screen, a calculation is done, something rolls out of the printer, an error message is generated. Whatever comes out, whatever you need to check or compare the actual result with to assess whether your test is passed or failed. So whenever I use the word test case, this is what I'm talking about, the written down explanation of all of these steps. And over the years, I've seen a lot of good test cases, but also bad test cases. And what makes a test case bad for me? Well, first of all, if you have to do duplicate work. Nobody likes to do things twice or even 3 times, 4 times if it has no added value. Doing redundant work, doing things that you don't even need for your test case, but it's written down in the steps and you have to execute. Test cases that are unclear or ambiguous. it's not clear what you're supposed to be doing, or it still leaves a lot of options open. Should I do it like this or like that? Onceability. It's a very weird word, and it's not that common English, but it means that your test case can actually only be executed once. And once you've executed, you can no longer execute it because your data is corrupted, or you're blown up the system or whatever. But a test case that you can only execute once has little added value, in my belief. Another reason to consider a test case bad is having low maintainability. If it is not easy to make changes to your test case or to reuse your test case for later projects, it has low maintainability. And that makes a test case bad in my eyes. A last reason for bad test cases are smells. You can't put the finger to it, but there's something fishy about the test case. You get your results, you will detect defects, and your test case will also pass or fail. You can execute it, but still there's something fishy about it. It smells, you cannot put the finger on it. And that is what I would like to talk about during my presentation, about those smells that I've detected. And important to notice, test smells are also subjective. So what I'm going to present you are my test smells. You may think of some of the smells that I'm going to discuss, well, for me, that's not a problem, or in my project, that's okay. So know that these things are somewhat subjective, but I do think there are some general commonalities between them. Now, what can cause these test smells? What can cause that a test case smells that you think it's fishy, that there's something wrong with it? Well, first of all, it can be sheer incompetence. The people or the persons who wrote the test cases, well, they actually have no idea what they're doing, and they probably will never even know what they're supposed to be doing. Negligence. The person who wrote the test case didn't care about it. He didn't care whether it was a good test case or not. He's just doing his job. He's paid for working from 9 to 5, creating a lot of text in a test management tool, and that's what he's doing. He doesn't care. Inexperience. If you're not experienced yet, you will make a lot more mistakes, or you will write more fishy test cases. You get good advice from all places all over the world, but you still need to find your own way of working. Time pressure. Put people under pressure and they will actually make more mistakes. I think everybody can confirm that from their own experience, that if you're put under time pressure, that you will make a lot more mistakes. So smelly test cases can be caused by time pressure. Then assumptions. If there's one thing you can never do, it's making assumptions. Because if you look at the word assume, it consists of 3 parts. Assuming is making an ass out of you and me. So never assume. If you assume something, verify it, whether your assumption is correct or not. But making assumptions, yeah, I think it works like that, never a good idea. Then instability. Instability of your requirements, instability of your system, constant changes, and the fact that you have to make constant changes yourself to your test cases will cause test smells. It will make your tests not that good, because you may forget to update certain cases, or you don't even care about making the changes anymore because it will change anyway. A last cause of test smells, and this is what my presentation really is about, are anti-patterns. Now, what are anti-patterns? An anti-pattern is a common response to a recurring problem. So something appears, we have to do something, fix something, and this is what we usually do. Why? Because, well, everybody does it like that, and it seems to be a good way to do so. But actually, it is ineffective, and there are other ways of doing it better, other ways that even have proof that they have better results, but we don't use them. To give a real-life example of an anti-pattern is the application Waze. Waze is actually a huge anti-pattern, because what happens whenever there are traffic jams, people try to avoid traffic jams because nobody likes to waste time in a traffic jam. So people put on their Waze and they look for other roads to get to their destination. What they will do is they will drive through secondary roads, drive through town villages where they should not be driving because it's not, well, it should only be for local traffic. And what happens is that on the secondary roads, you also get a lot of traffic jams. And because everybody is also blocking the secondary roads, entry and exits for the highways get blocked as well. So the traffic jams actually become worse. And you are also causing or augmenting or increasing the risks of having accidents because you're driving in places where you shouldn't be, near school areas and so on. So using Waze is actually an anti-pattern. Try to work from home is a better solution to traffic jams, especially now with Corona, than using an app like Waze. The first anti-pattern that I would like to discuss with you, and I've given them all some fancy names, which makes it easier to refer to them. The first one is, have we met before? And this is how it would look like in your test cases. You see here a certain test case where in test case 7, you're creating a new proposal. And to do so, you need to log in as an insurance broker. In test case 56, all of a sudden, you're logging in as a broker, and that's the test case. So you're actually doing duplicate work. So what is the smell that we see here? Well, we're seeing that we have to test something that is already tested or covered elsewhere, and sometimes it's implicitly done. The logging in as a broker, we need it for a certain test case, so why have a separate test case to do that again? Or we even have duplicate test cases, which have then been created by different testers and they were not aware of each other that they've created that test case. How can we fix this? Well, we need to have a good link to your requirements, because if you have a good link to your requirements, then it's obvious that if the requirement is covered by a test case, you don't need a second test case to cover that same requirement. Also important is to plan who will write which test case. Assign the work to your testers. Don't let them pick their own work, but plan who is doing what. And what can be useful in more agile context, where we've learned to do collaborative user story creation, you can also do collaborative test case creation. Why not write or create our test cases all together? A second smell. This one is one I really dislike, but it happens a lot. Title-itis. What is the problem? Well, it's a typical business problem. Whenever you ask people from the business to write down acceptance test cases, they come up with a large list of all things they would like to test. And they come up with all kinds of situations, which are all good tests, if they would have been elaborated. But they only write what they want to do, and they don't write down their expected results. So you only get titles for test cases and no expected result, what makes it impossible for you to execute or to perform those tests because, well, you cannot compare the actual with the expected result. You can only perform the actions and then measure what the actual result is, but you don't know if that's okay or not. So a typical business problem, they don't write these things down because, well, it's their job. They know what the expected result should be. What is the solution for this? Well, pretty easy. Make sure that every test case, every step has an expected result. And also establish a good link to your requirements, because your requirements might also give an indication what the expected result should be. The next problem, the next anti-pattern, test cases for dummies. This is typically something that occurs for junior testers. They had some education on testing, people learned them how to write test cases, and somebody told them, well, if you're creating test cases, your grandmother should be able to execute that test case. You should consider that your grandmother should also know how she should manage a computer. If you also have to explain in your test case where the start button of the computer is and how to work with the mouse, it's way beyond what it's in scope for a test case. So giving full navigation scripts in your test cases, explaining every step in full detail, for me, that smells. So what can we do here? We can work with preconditions. instead of saying, well, open your browser, enter the URL, click enter, wait for the page to open, just write as a precondition, you are on that website in that browser, and then start your actions. So implicitly, people should know for the preconditions what they should do to get there. What else can you do is split the navigation, the layout, and functionality tests. So just create one test case that explains the entire navigation to get to a certain page or a certain part in the application, a certain step in a process. And then for the next tests, you can use the precondition that refers to that navigation test. Same for layout. If you want to check whether all buttons are in place and so on, just do that once. After you did the navigation script, have a test that describes how the page should look like, and that's it. Don't explain every time again where the enter button is or where the start button on the screen is. You don't need to do that. It's just duplicate work. What else you can do is working with call cases. Call cases are some form of a template test case that describes a specific sort of action, a navigational script or whatever, so that you can make your test cases more concise and that the full elaboration of those steps is in a call case. But beware, if you have to execute these test cases and you're working with call cases, then you have to execute all of those steps. So sometimes it's better to use preconditions than call cases. Invalidation Heaven. This is something for the testers. They are very good at this, experienced testers, to create a lot of test cases with invalid inputs, because that's what we like to do. We like to test for the negative things. We want to break the application. So we come up with a lot of negative inputs. We're going to test with empty values, with numbers that are out of range. We're going to insert letters where only numbers are allowed. We're going to insert large numbers, small numbers, decimal numbers. We're going to write exponential numbers. We're going to write a number in full letters, and so on. And the expected result for all of them is, well, nothing, because there's input validation, and it only allow for numbers. So there's little added value in writing all of these things down. Only if you have a project manager who wants to see you create a lot of test cases, you're working like this, but otherwise try to avoid this, because you're wasting a lot of time on this. And this is not where the major defects will be found. So having a separate test case for every type of invalid input, user with little added value, don't go there. Combine them in one case, one invalid input case in which you can then parameterize all the possible negative inputs you can come up with. Or you can even use a checklist. Create a checklist up front and just create the test that tells you that you have to execute the checklist on that input field. And that checklist can be extended, can be kept up to date with whatever new findings you have or whatever changes are made to the system. But you can reuse the checklist for every input field in your application. The hot stepper. You may recall the song from Inika Modze. What do we have here? We have steps, a lot of steps, and even more steps. Every single action you have to do is a separate step. And for every step, you need an expected result. So maybe we can combine some of those steps, especially if there's no specific effect. If you have to complete a registration form, you need to enter a lot of data. Having a separate step for every data element you have to enter, it has no added value. You just combine and make one step, enter a valid, give a valid value for all of these input fields, click enter instead of enter a full name, enter a first name, enter the address, enter the house number, enter the postal code, and so on. Steps clump, bulk steps. This is the inverse of the previous one. Here, we do all steps in one, all actions in one block. And just reading this, and you really have to read very well to read all of this, it makes it very hard to understand what is actually supposed to be done, what is the goal of the step or of the action. So you're doing too much in one step. It's hard to see the big picture. So what can we do? Well, first of all, use preconditions. That can already solve part of the problem, putting what can be known to be done as a precondition to the test. Also, split the navigation, split the layout and the functionality, so to make your test cases more concise, and work with call cases. And of course, only combine what really has to be combined. Whenever there's a little expected behavior or some different behavior in the system, it should be a new step. I'll wait a bit before I'll put over the test case on this one, because some would like to look a little longer to this picture. You may recall the song, and if you don't, it's a very interesting video clip, not always suitable for work. Call on me. You're using a lot of call cases. You're using a lot of calls to other tests that you have to execute, using a lot of parameters as well. Right? This is usually done by some testers who have a coding background, and they've learned when they had to code that they had to foresee for future changes and make it all connected and group things that are reused in other functions and then call those other functions. Well, yeah, true, but this makes it very unreadable, especially for people from the business. If they see this, they run away screaming. And well, sometimes it's not even necessary. Sometimes it even happens that you have a call case for a single action that only needs to be performed once in only one test case. So don't exaggerate. Yes, maybe in the future it will be reused in other test cases. If it's not the case right now, don't do it. Only put in call cases what you are using in different test cases. What else can you do? Create a blueprint up front. And what do I mean by this is, well, you can already plan which tester is going to do what, but why not make a design of your application and split up the parts, who is going to write what? That's one thing, but also how are we going to write it? What are the building blocks for our test cases? Which call cases do we want? Do we need? Which is shared functionality? And draw that up front so that you also know, if you're writing a test case, whether you can reuse a call case or not. God case. This is also one of my favorites. The God case is a typical problem that you see with end-to-end testing. What do we want to do? We want to test everything, preferably completely end-to-end in one test case. And you can see we have already 271 steps and we're not finished yet. Testing everything in one case, preferably we also automate this, because then we can just run it and see if everything is working correctly. Usually this test case will always fail. It's just too many steps, too many things that can go wrong, and we all know Murphy's Law. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong. So what is a solution to this? Divide and conquer. Work with smaller steps, break it up into smaller logical blocks, making sure that one test case has only one test objective. So don't test with all different users at the same time. Don't test with valid and invalid data at the same time, and so on. And you can sequence, of course, these small steps so that there's still a logical order. But the advantage of breaking it up in smaller pieces, that if one piece fails, you can maybe still continue with the other pieces, and it's not the entire test case that fails, but just that one step. A bottom level test case. If you did a course on testing, you may have learned about high-level test cases and low-level test cases. High-level test cases, they are test cases with a generic description of your test data. We need a person older than 18, or we need a person that lives in Paris. A low-level test case is a test case with concrete data. While the person older than 18, that's Wim. The person that's living in Paris, that's Georges Henry, and he lives at Champs-Élysées, etc. So that's a low-level test case. A bottom-level test case, well, then everything is low-level. every possible value is hard-coded in your test case. And this is something, I really hate this if I see these kind of things. I really believe that you should keep your test case as high level as possible for as long as possible, and don't make everything too concrete, because, well, your data will get corrupted and your colleague testers will use your data and create that, problems with your data and so on. So to avoid this and to increase repeatability and also maintainability of your test case, I would recommend that you describe on a high level what data you need, but also where you can find it. Add an SQL query to your test case so that people who have to execute it can execute that SQL query and just find fresh new data that is usable for that test case. Important then, of course, is to log somewhere which data you've used, because your test case has to be repeatable, of course. Well, other thing is you can do is use parameters. So replace those hard-coded value with parameters and then use a data table to feed those test cases. Click, push, press. What's the problem here? Well, do we have to click the button, or do we have to push the button or press the button? And is it a customer or a client? And are we looking at the summary or at the overview or at the list? And is it being shown or is it displayed? Are they the same, or is it something different if it's shown or displayed? By not using a common vocabulary, things become more complicated. If you're using your terminology inconsistently, well, it might confuse people. So what is the solution to this? Use a glossary, and have a glossary not only for the words you're going to use, so whether it's shown or displayed, but also to make some standard phrases, some template phrases that it's always click the button. I've heard companies, heard examples where they used RMC, which means right mouse button click, and they just said RMC and everybody knew that it was a right mouse button click. Use that glossary, set it up together with your colleagues to get a common way of describing things. It makes it more easy to understand the test case, but it also makes it more easy to set up the test case because you have templates. And if you use some tooling, you maybe can even set it up that you can just, from the templates, assemble your test case. Big ball of mud, yet another test smell. What is a big ball of mud? It's the test version of spaghetti code. You have a lot of test cases, but there's no logic in between them. Things were added later, removed, changed, renamed, replaced, changed orders, and so on. And it's really hard to see what goes together with what. Here we have some test cases for an ATM machine, and we're doing withdrawal and then a transfer, and then we're going to print our statements, and then we're doing another withdrawal, yet another withdrawal, now another transfer, and then another transfer, and then we're going to fill the ATM machine to do another print of the statements. Usually this comes from projects that run for a long time. It's accidental complexity. Things are added just when they needed to be added. There's no clear structure. A lot of people were working on it. People get replaced on the project. We get new testers, requirements changed, and so on. What is the solution? Again, create your blueprint up front. What are we writing where? Use folders in your tools or try different tabs or whatever to group whatever as similar logic. Use a glossary. That also helps in overcoming the big ball of mud, and have a good link to your requirements, because then you can maybe group your test cases based upon requirement. The magic test. This is for the fans of Harry Potter. In a magic test, you have to do some steps, but you don't know how you get from A to C because B is not described. You're supposed to be doing things, but you don't know what or how. It makes things more complicated than needed. And it also gives you more or different ways of getting there and makes it more difficult to reproduce your test case. a solution, again, create a blueprint up front with the different steps that should be in your test cases. The ORRRRacle. What's the problem with the ORRRRacle? Well, you can start your test. Here is an example of a test where you can click the start button, or you can just hit the enter button, or you can use the menu and then select the launch functionality. And as an expected result, you get the right screen, or you get an error message. Yeah, but what am I supposed to be doing, and what should I be seeing? The problem here is the word or. Leaving options open in test case is a no-go. It should be clear what you're supposed to be doing. Again, split the navigation, the layout, and the functionality. If you want to test that you have multiple options in doing so, we'll have multiple test cases for doing so. Remember, one test case, one test objective. We're almost through the test spells. There are 2 more to go. So one more step. What's the issue here? Well, in your expected result, you're supposed to do some more actions. Your expected results should really be facts that you should verify or that you should check, but there shouldn't be any actions in your expected results. That's also why I dislike the word check that or verify that or see whether blah, blah, blah in your expected result. No, that's for your action. You should just indicate what the actual result is. Your payment is in the list. That's it. So again, split the navigation, the layout, and the functionality. So also the navigation for verifying your results. If you have to go check in the database and see in the overview screen and click on the details screen, those are all different steps, different actions to be taken. And of course, you can use call cases for this, because this is something you will probably have to do then for every case. And here I forgot to change the title. What's the problem here? There are 4 arrows now on this screen because, first of all, the title is not changed. But the smell we see here are typos, incomplete sentences, incomplete words, copy-paste errors. How do we solve this? Well, stay focused, take regular breaks, go get a coffee, but keep your mind to what you're doing. And if you get a lot of disruptions, go see it someplace else. Ask your partner to check for your children for a little while if you're working from home. And what else you can do is use call cases instead of copy-pasting steps. Now, I've discussed a lot of anti-patterns, and from the solutions to those anti-patterns, the ones that have proven good results, I've assembled this list. And it's a 2-pager, and on this page you see the ones that you should also learn during testing courses. Using test design techniques, link everything to your requirement. Do not forget to add an expected result, work with preconditions, use parameters, use template test cases, limit the dependencies of your test case. It should not be the case that you have too many dependencies, because then, well, you might get into problems with the execution of your cases. One test case should have one objective. Use a checklist when possible. The ones that we usually don't see in a testing course are that you have to create a blueprint up front, so that you draw up how you're going to design your test cases, that you plan who writes what, who is responsible for which part of the application, that you use a glossary with standard expressions, how are we going to express certain actions in the system, that you use high-level data descriptions as long as possible where appropriate. Divide and conquer. Split when necessary, group when needed. Sequence small steps. Yes, we can small tests. It's better to have a larger number of small tests that are executed consecutively than one big, large test, because if one part fails, the entire test is failed. Split the navigation, the layout, and the functionality. Create separate test cases for that. Stay focused, take regular breaks, and review and refactor. Writing test cases is not something you do just once. It's a process where you have to go through your test cases again and again, and that you have to make changes based on lessons learned or based on the things you've learned in this presentation. So for the reviewing, what can you do? Well, you can use the test smells, or the ones that you think for your project are important. Maybe you want to add some yourself. And if you do, I'm really curious about those. You can have a traceability matrix. Traceability matrix in which you indicate which smells you see, and that then automatically gets you also which actions you can do to get over those. Work with a glossary. Check that everything is written according to the glossary and that the phrases that you see are coming from the glossary. And ask yourself, after a single read of the test case, do I understand what I'm supposed to be doing? And if that's not the case, it's not a good test case. It has to be reworked. So when you have to rework, when you have to refactor, keep in mind the KISS principle. Keep it simple, keep it stupid. Simplify things. Clean up using the design patterns that I've offered you. And ask yourself for everything, well, what is the effect if I would remove this? What is the effect if I remove this step? Is the test case still executable? Is it still understandable? If you can remove things that are useless or redundant, your test case become more concise and still keep the same readability. And do this regularly. Avoid test debt. Test debt is that the fact that you have too much work in reworking your test cases that you will actually not be able to do a lot of execution because your test cases are that crap that you can no longer can advance at a sufficient pace. So if you do all of this, you will get good test cases. And what are good test cases? Well, every good test case has a purpose, it has an objective, it has a reason to exist. A good test case is readable and understandable. A good test case is feasible. You know it's possible to actually execute it. A good test case is independent. It has not too many dependencies on other test cases. A good test case is, of course, repeatable and reusable. And that's what I think is very important. A good test case is also maintainable because you will have to make changes to your test case and you will reuse your test case. That's it for my story. Please contact me if you have any remarks on my test smells that you say, Wim, what you said there, I really don't take that, I'm not agreeing, or if you want to add your own test smells or your own anti-patterns, please let me know. Here are my contact details, and I know that this will also be shared later on. So please find me, please contact me. I'd love to hear your stories, and you can also contribute to this list. And now it's time to go for the questions. So I'm going to look into Slido right now to see if there were any questions, and then I'll see you later in the Zoom session. And I see that there are no questions, so I think it's time to go to the, what am I saying? Time to go to the Zoom session. Thank you for listening to my story.